Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Schultz, and I'm a faculty member here in the Haas School of Business. I see some former students, some current students. Don't worry, I won't be cold calling on you in this context. I'm here with a great honor to introduce Kara Sammet, who's the founder and principal of Gender Lens. I'm going to give a slightly different, non-traditional introduction. Since she's going to talk about her story and her background, I won't emphasize that as much. Instead, I'd like you to listen for two themes that no doubt you'll hear throughout the day today, but also that I think will come out very strongly as you listen to Kara's story. The first theme is energy and enthusiasm, and the second is pivoting to connect the dots. So the first one, energy and enthusiasm, I first met Kara, 8, 9 years or so ago in this very classroom. It was a class I was teaching that went from 6 to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night. 9 p.m. rolls around, I'm exhausted. Everyone else is exhausted. And up comes Kara, just pounding me with one question after another about leadership and management and how can I learn more. And I was so impressed that I needed some help developing some online courses, and we went on to do some, I think, really unique and leading edge things on online education for leadership. So you'll hear a lot of energy, enthusiasm coming from Kara, and that's something for all of you to tap in your careers. The second thing is pivoting to connect the dots. Entrepreneurs talk about the importance for business ideas to pivot, to go where the opportunities are. I would say that should be something that you think about too. Eve mentioned this as well, the non-linear part of a career. Pivoting where you need to, and then connecting the dots. I get this from Steve Jobs. For those of you who haven't seen his graduation speech that he gave many years ago at that university down the road. It's a really impressive graduation speech. But one of the concepts he talks about in there is the idea of connecting the dots, which really means that you do different things earlier in your career and your life, and you never know how they're going to come together, but yet you pursue things that bring out your passion, your energy, your enthusiasm, and at some point in time, you pivot, you start to connect those dots, and you really start to have an impact. So think about those two themes for your career, but also think about them as you hear Kara tell her stories. I'm very excited that she's here because I think she's really on the verge of having some transformative impacts on the venture capital industry and bringing intersectional views of gender inclusion to a space, an industry where it is much needed. So please welcome Kara Sammet.
Thank you. Isn't he amazing? If you are lucky enough to take a class with him, to have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. So what I'm going to ask all of you to do right now is, without talking, is to stand up and take a power pose. Yes! Oh, feels good. Okay, sit down. Now, I know that most of the research on the power pose has been debunked, but here's what I also know. It feels really good to stand up after you've been sitting for a long time. And for me, as a leader, when I do that, I feel grounded and I feel present and ready to go. So several years ago, I was talking with an investor. This was on the East Coast. He was an older, white male. He had made a small fortune as an entrepreneur and now was working as an angel investor and also as a philanthropist. And we were talking about his strategy for moving forward, particularly in the philanthropy piece. And he had two priorities. One was he wanted to not pay any taxes. And the second was that he really wanted to invest in education. He had been the first in his family to go to college, and his business success had come through his contacts that he had made while he was attending Cornell. So he was very attached to Cornell and investing in scholarships, and he was funding a chair at the business school. And so we were talking, and at the time I had I believe I had finished my PhD. I have a PhD in social and cultural studies from UC Berkeley with an emphasis in gender and measurement. And he said, "Where did you go to school?" And I said, "Berkeley." This was on the East Coast. And he said, "Is that a good school?" I am sure that we have at least as many Nobel laureates as you do at Cornell. Okay. So, and then the next question was something to the effect of, are there as many Jews on the East Coast at Berkeley? To which I paused. And the truth is that I have been thinking about, and many of us, most of us, experience these types of bias in business, in our personal lives. And I had a long time to already kind of process this type of microaggression. And so the approach that I take, and what I believe can really make a difference in business, is twofold. One is authentic relationships, really connecting with people where they are, meeting people where they are, because a lot of times those biases are unconscious. And I'm working with these clients from a place of curiosity and compassion and empathy, and trying to understand what is going on here and what is the need, and how can I connect with this person to make a change. But you can't do that across such a big industry like venture capital. You can start there and have that be the seed, but then we need to move on to structural change as well. So those two pieces, the personal and the structural, have really been my way forward. So with this client, I did two things. One was I really focused on, as we were setting up the scholarship, instead of having it just be merit-based, was looking at what are the other factors that we can consider. How can we look at potential hardships and other barriers that students have faced? Understanding that we're going to meet, of course, a minimum standard of competency, but then from there, we're going to move forward and look at other factors. And the second thing was I let him know that, oh, my grandfather also went to Cornell as an undergrad on a scholarship, and he loved it. However, when he was ready for medical school, there was a quota against Jews, and so he couldn't go. I said that in a way later so that it could land and have a place for him to take that in and just think about it. I was prepped for that particular conversation because my mom, who was Catholic, had eloped with a Jew when she was 18 and had me when she was 19. And at the time, women were not allowed to have, you may or may not know this, women couldn't have credit cards with without their spouse's consent. Not only did they, if you were a stewardess, you had to quit your job once you got married. You could also be fired once you were pregnant for any job. So, but her family had pretty much financially disowned her when she married my father, and more or less emotionally. And so by the time she was ready to leave my father, pretty early on, here she was, about 21, 22, with no source of credit and no support financially. And that really shaped me because she pretty much pounded into my head, you will always be financially independent. You will always have a way to support yourself and your children, because she did not. And when I was very little, we did have, she has told me, I don't actually remember this, but she has said there were times when we had to choose between gas for me to get to work and mac and cheese for you guys. So that's kind of like the piece with her about where I came into the gender piece and a lot of awareness around class. And also, her family was Catholic, so I was born as an outsider in my family already. And pretty much most of my life, while that part of her family was still alive, I did pretty regularly hear those kinds of microaggressions. So I was ready for that investor. I believe that, like I said, these relationships and the structure are the answer. And I came to that through another undergrad experience so I was really kind of predisposed to understanding gender inequities because of my mom's experience and the religion and class. And then when I was in undergrad, I went to Madison for undergrad, and I was in the student association. It was the Wisconsin Student Association, which is the governing body. And we actually had a lot of power because we controlled, I don't know how it is at Berkeley, but when I was an undergrad, we controlled the money for guest speakers on campus. So any student group that wanted a guest speaker to come to campus had to come through us. And there was one time that the Black Student Union came to us and said, we want Rosa Parks to come speak on campus. And like the rest of the student association, the Wisconsin Student Association, I voted no. And the reason I justified at the time was because her speaker fee was twice as much as the other speakers on campus. And at the time, I didn't have the frame to understand that equal is not always equitable. And so when the leader of the Black Student Association said to our group, she stood there and she said, "You all are a bunch of racists. You are not the Wisconsin Student Association. You are the white Student Association." And it was the first time, as I'm sure that many of us experience, where you have this really rude, crazy awakening. She was not rude, she was giving me a gift to your privilege. I hadn't seen myself as white. I could see the other pieces. And in that moment, she gave me such a gift that I was not able to repay to her, but because I was a women's studies major at the time, it was when women's studies was really coming to grips with its focus on white feminism, where the things they were fighting for, and we see this in business too, the things that we were fighting for, that they were fighting for, were really disproportionately benefiting white women. And so the department was really grappling with, without necessarily using these terms, what does intersectional feminism mean? What does it mean? And how can we really internalize and take action with gender as a focus, but completely embodying our full intersectional selves across race and sexuality and class and religion and language and nationality? What does this mean? And so I was so lucky. I got to study with, I had professors who were critical race theorists, and I had a whole semester on Chicana women's literature. So it was a time, as an undergrad, that's a really magical time typically, where you're able to kind of be open to these new ideas. And so I think, I had been primed to be open, and then I was in the right place at the right time with this gift from this amazing woman who spent her energy and her knowledge to share with me, to point out my white privilege, which wasn't her job, but she did it. And so my job from then on, I really believed, was to pay it forward. I wasn't sure how to do that. And I haven't been sure. And in fact, the whole time I was doing my PhD, my PhD was in social and cultural studies. I was really interested in how do organizations affect change? How can we help organizations affect change around identity? And I was working as a social impact assessment expert, developing technology. I worked as a user experience researcher and a product designer and product manager. And that's actually why I came and took Frank's class, is because on the other part of campus, they don't necessarily know anything about business. And I was in charge of marketing this technology that we were selling to state departments of education. And no one in our department had any marketing experience, had no business, like no one had taken a business class. And I was like, oh my God, I better go learn about this so I can figure this out. I was trying to figure out the pricing structure, and I was like, I don't know, it was software as a service, right? And so I don't know, let's price it at this. And so I came and took the class that was business fundamentals for non-MBA students. And that's where I met Frank, which leads me to the next part of my development, which was, I thought, oh my God, I mean, like, I was someone who loved school, right? And I came to Frank and I was like, I think I should go to business school. And at this time I was already graduated, I was in a postdoc. And he was like, well, you can come to business school if you want to. I'm sure you'd be fine, but you really just need to go start your own business. And I was like, oh no, no. I had been consulting on the side for about, I don't know how long at that point, maybe 15 years or something. I've been consulting on the side for a long time, helping organizations develop inclusive environments and girls and women's leadership. And so I was like, no, I'm just, like the billing and all that, I don't want to do that. So I was working as a contractor at Google. I was helping them do some research and get it published around how we can build the tech pipeline. So what are the factors, what are the most important factors? Because we know that there's a huge array of factors that get girls to go into computer science. What are the most important factors? So we were doing a lot of analyses. And I had met with and was doing some advising with the woman who runs Google's global women's employee resource group. And we were sitting at a Watermark conference, and at this point, I had resisted Frank's encouragement to start a business for many years. Oh, just let me say this about Frank too, and this is something I really, really want to encourage everyone. So, what enabled me to start a business, because I did start a business, was, of course, I had all this in myself, but Frank was the person who said, you can do so much more than you realize, and the world needs you right now. Again and again, Frank said, you have so much value to bring to the world. Get out there, like take a risk, make something big. And even when I started the idea of Gender Lens, I was starting small, and every time he'd say, Kara, think bigger and ask for more. You know, when I was consulting and he said, the next time we talk about this, I want you to have doubled your fee. So through grad school, I'm someone who really seeks out challenges. I like hard problems. I took Russian as my foreign language because it was a good mind game, right? And so for my committee, when you do a PhD, you have a committee. And I chose a committee that was, by and large, really tough. They were really hard, and they challenged me constantly. And the reason I did that was because I felt like, oh, if I can make it past them, I can make it past anybody. And it wasn't until I started working with Frank that I felt and I understood what it's like to work with someone and to have an advisor who's not just challenging you to grow, but who is in your corner supporting you. And it is a world of difference. I had never experienced that before. To have someone, my committee believed in me completely, but they were the devil's advocate. Whereas Frank was like, he was my cheerleader. Go, go, go. So, to end, we are at a place in venture capital right now where we know things are not good. The percent of deal flow to women is very low. The percent of women getting funded and the amount of funding is very low. And for women of color, it is minuscule. It's barely even on the radar. We know there are so many problems with the culture around the venture capital industry and in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in general. And it's time. This is the time. We have momentum. We have women who have worked their way up by themselves as the only venture capitalists who are saying enough. And they are coming out as female in the venture capital industry. And it's true. Magdalena Yeschel, she's written an amazing book called Power Up. I highly recommend it. And also, you have women founders like Ninian Wang who are really brave and working strategically to point out the problems around sexual harassment and hostile environment within that ecosystem. So the time is now. There's momentum, there's acceleration to move forward, to disrupt this industry and make the venture capital and entrepreneurial ecosystem a place where we can all thrive as founders, as investors, as creators. Thank you.